What's going on, Tamers? It's me, guy who finally found his first white hair in his beard. I guess I'm a Digimon now. So in other news, the BT11 Dimensional Phase meta has wrapped up its second week of games, and it is a perfect time to take a look at what topped over the course of the week. And if there was honestly a theme for the games that I saw and the results that I've seen so far, it is a world divided out there. There is almost no consensus on which version of the top decks are really good, which version of a deck is really good, which decks are really good. It just feels like things are kind of scattered right now. With the exception that BlackWarGreymon X is definitely at the top of the meta, everything else really just kind of seems unfocused. It really does show that a lot of the players out there are really exploring what are their options, and because BT11 gave support to a lot of decks that didn't have a lot of support, as well as introduce a bunch of new decks, I think this process is going to take a little bit longer than normal. That being said, let's actually take a look at the results and talk a little bit about some of the takeaways from this past week. So if you take a look at the actual results for the week, I think the first thing that stands out is that BlackWarGreymon X Antibody is still at the top of the meta. What this doesn't tell you, though, is the story of the red base and the black base that we talked about last week, and how that divide between the two, where it was mostly red focused, is starting to shrink quite a bit. So there's been a ton of innovation on the black base players, where initially they were only focusing on Agumon and Greymon cards. They've started to slowly expand that pool of options that they have to other X Antibody cards, which has made for some really interesting deck lists. Stay tuned, we'll take a look at that a little bit later when we cover some of the deck lists for the week. So as we go down the list here, we can see that Crossheart still takes second place for the second week in a row. However, there's been a divide between X5 and X7 players. Whereas last week we saw a ton of X5 support and almost nothing for X7, that's definitely shifted where both decks have the same amount of wins at 6 apiece. Personally, I believe that X5 is a little bit faster than X7. However, once you get your X7 on the board, the influence it has is more than an X5 does. Being able to gain Reboot, Blocker, Security Attack Plus, Piercing. It has the full suite of effects to make it a force to be reckoned with on the board, not to mention the fact that it just destroys a Digimon outright and then buffs itself for every source that it has. That being said, Hades Force out of BlackWarGreymon X Antibody is still a hard counter to both of these decks, and until they can find an answer, we'll likely still see results that are subpar to BlackWarGreymon X Antibody. So moving along, before the set came out, the Mirai Tamer had a ton of hype behind it, being able to basically turbo out your Mastemons by putting a Anjouwomon or Lady Devimon on the board immediately once you get to one or the other. And while Mastemon has done really well for itself over the course of the week, the deck is still very unsettled. We've seen everything from, Meiku and Ragwell lines to like a purple base with like yellow highlights to it. It still is very divided. I can say that one thing that most of these decks do have in common is the addition of the new Ignitemon, the BT11 level 3 Digimon that allows you to attack and then destroy one of your own Digimon and destroy an opponent's Digimon of the same level. We'll take a look at what one of these decks looks like in the deck highlight coming up very soon. The last big takeaway that I want to highlight for the week is that green really is the line in the sand for the upper echelon and lower echelon decks in the meta right now. Things like Bloomlord, Grandis X, which came out of nowhere again, and then decks like Examon have done really well for themselves over the course of the week. One of the points that I want to make here when I say that green really does divide the cream from the crop is that these decks either kill you very fast in the case of Grandis X, or once they get set up, they're so incredibly oppressive that it's hard to win in the case of things like Examon, as well as Bloomlord and Hydramon. So what it feels like is that the decks that fall below these three, with the exception of maybe Blue Flare, either cannot match the speed of Grandis X, or cannot break a board from either Examon or from Bloomlord. And so as we take a look at the rest of the decks on this list, you see the Machine Dramon here starting to do decently well for itself. I expect this deck to do a little bit better, and I think that we also got the leak of Chaos Dramon X Antibody, so that'll be interesting to see how this performs once that card is released from BT12. But other than that, again, lots of decks we've seen before here. WarGreymon X Antibody, Jesmon, Beelstar still. Why won't this deck die? We also see a couple of the new decks in Ulforce Vidramon, Marsmon, Phoenixmon, as well as Mervamon topping. We also see the Galacticmon support coming out there with the win for the week. If you haven't seen my video on the Galacticmon deck profile, please take a look at that. It's a deck that I didn't have a lot of hope for, but actually outperformed my expectations. And if nothing else, it's pretty interesting. So yeah, if you have time, take a look there after this. So that's going to be the results for week 2. Next, let's talk about some of the deck builds I want to highlight over the past week's games. So last week I showed off what the red base looks like for the BlackWarGreymon X Antibody deck list. However, this week I want to show the opposite side, which is the black base, and this comes out of a Korean Locals Winners deck. And it has a really interesting tech here. We see, of course, the new black Agumon X Antibody. We also see the Bakuman that I mentioned last week. However, this time we see the addition of a Dorumon. Now, this was something that I had not even had on my radar, but it's a fantastic pick, being able to allow you to search out for X antibody cards, as well as gain the memory once per turn whenever you play an X antibody up under this Digimon if it's an inheritance. Outside of that, it's pretty standard. We see the Greymon X antibody, the Greymon. The jamming BlackWarGreymon is an interesting pickup here. I've seen some people run things like Deltamon as well. The rest of the lineup I feel is pretty standard. I think that the maybe single BlackWarGreymon is a little out of place, but that's just a personal preference. We see here a couple copies of Yu, as well as the Maki Tamer that I mentioned before to pick up the Bakumon, as well as a couple cool boys just to get that extra memory gain whenever you go to an X antibody of the same level. And then finally we see the Hopmon here, being able to give you that little bit more DP that you might need to get your BlackWarGreymon from 13, 14, and then with Yu's effect 15, 16,000, which is really hard to overcome. Another deck that I want to highlight from the past week's results is Mastemon. I think this build is very special because this player not only won one, but two separate events with the same build. Now, some really interesting lineup choices here. We see the old Mastemon being able to have both players drop a security, and then you can play level 4 yellow or purple Digimon from your trash, which combos really well with this Teirumon here, the promo Teirumon. Whenever you have 3 less security and it gets played, you can recover 1. Additionally, it also has blocker. So the combo here of playing the Mastemon to play the Teirumon lets you recover the security. Your opponent drops 1 security only, and then you have level 4 on the board that has blocker as well. Additionally, we see the inclusion of the Ignitemon that I talked about before, being able to gain 1 memory and inheritance whenever you play Digimon by an effect. This combos with so many pieces in the deck: the Mirai, the Angemon, Flame Hell Scythe, the Mastemon itself. And then even things like Impmon here. So Impmon here, a fantastic choice. It is a promo card, so if you live in a region or an area that does not allow promo cards, I'm looking at you again, Southeast Asia, you might want to swap this out with something else. For example, I think the starter deck Mastemon Skymon, which allows you to search, is a good option here. You could also go for something like a Meikumon, which gives a similar security effect, being able to play it after the battle. However, the fact that it is level 4 and it's purple-yellow, in this build specifically makes it a little bit wonky in my opinion. So the last deck that I want to highlight is actually going to be Grandis Kuwagamon. Now you're probably wondering, East, why are you showing me a deck that came out like, I don't know, 3 sets ago now? And the answer to that question is because I feel like it's a rare moment in the game where the English scene has influenced the Japanese scene. See, when Grandis was around in the Japanese scene, at that time Jet Sylphimon wasn't restricted, and as a result, security control could kind of run amok. So building up a Grandis and then having it swing into, a Chaos Degrade basically means you just lost the game. And even when this deck was around, it definitely didn't look like this. I really feel like the English scene pushed this deck to its absolute limits, utilizing the Digiburst mechanic and then comboing off of your Grand Kuwagamon and then going to your Grandis for potential OTK. So what's so special about this lineup specifically? It's actually none of the cards that you would think. It's actually the Pyokomon here as the Digitamon, being able to Digiburst and gain 2,000 additional DP. This 2,000 additional DP plus the plus 4,000 from Grandis Kuwagamon puts this guy at 18 KDP, which is a very, very difficult number to overcome. And if you remember when I talked about the BlackWarGreymon X antibody deck list just a moment ago, I said that you want to get to 17 KDP with Yugioh, but getting past that is actually kind of tough. So what does that mean? So what you can do is, whenever you see an opponent play a BlackWarGreymon X antibody, you can take your Grand Kuwagamon who's in Raising, promote him to the battle area, using 3 memory, and of course we see the 4 copies of the Mimi Tamer as well as 4 copies of the Green Memory Boost to go to 3 whenever you need to. Play a level 3 to absorb the destruction from the BlackWarGreymon X antibody, and then you can Digiburst everything up under your Grand Kuwagamon. You can Digivolve into your Grandis for 1 memory that you've also gained from your Zasomon or your Weedmon here, and then you can have it swing over your opponent's BlackWarGreymon. The BlackWarGreymon will destroy the level 3, you will unsuspend, and then you can attack directly, which will likely win you the game. And with the added benefit of this deck just being particularly quick and pretty fast, it can overcome a lot of other decks that are just trying to set up in the meantime. Again, I said that green really is the line in the sand, and this is one of the reasons why. Being able to have a counterplay to one of the strongest decks in the meta, give yourself a chance, if nothing else, as well as being able to fight against most of the other things pretty consistently is really strong. So hopefully I didn't get too big brain at the very end there, but that's going to be the week 2 recap for the JP meta for BT11. Let me know what you thought about that in the comments below. Do you think that Grandis has the potential to actually become a top meta deck again, just because BlackWarGreymon is kind of weak to it? Do you think it is a decent counterplay? How do you feel about X5 and X7 being split? Do we start to see X7 overtake X5, or does X5 just keep its supremacy over in the meta? Anyway, thanks again for watching, folks. I'm gonna get out of here. Before you get out of here, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.